The desert has a way of keeping secrets, even when the wind wants to tell them. In 1991, Dry Mesa was the kind of town that seemed frozen in time. One long road, one diner, one gas station. People knew each other's faces, each other's sins, and they all knew Abner Crane. He was the man who pumped their gas, fixed their tires, and nodded kindly even when they laughed in his face. He was 4'3", with shoulders slightly bent, and eyes that carried both warmth and apology. To the townsfolk, he was a joke that walked on two legs. They called him Little Abner, never his full name, and never with kindness. He came to Dry Mesa after his mother died. Nobody knew from where, and nobody cared to ask. He lived in a small trailer behind the station, spent his evenings feeding stray cats, and his mornings sweeping red dust from the pavement before dawn. When he spoke, it was soft, polite. He never raised his voice, even when they mocked the way he walked, the way he reached for things just out of grasp. The laughter always came first, the loud kind that echoes off glass windows and leaves a sting long after it fades. At the bar, they'd toss coins at his feet, just to see if he'd pick them up. One night, a group of teenagers made him dance to the jukebox for tips, filming the whole thing on a handheld camcorder. He smiled through it, eyes wet, pretending it didn't hurt. The video spread around town, copied, replayed, passed through hands sticky with beer and cruelty. No one thought about how he felt when the laughter followed him home. They just kept laughing. Abner began to change after that. He stopped speaking much, stopped sweeping the station, stopped smiling at customers. He'd stare at the desert horizon for long stretches, eyes unfocused, lips moving in quiet whispers. Some said he was praying, others said he was talking to someone who wasn't there. When his boss yelled at him for being late, he only said, "I'll be gone soon anyway." No one paid attention. No one asked what he meant. On the night of August 12th, those same teenagers drove past his trailer again, carrying their camcorder, looking for another laugh. The footage was never found, but witnesses remembered hearing screams, high, panicked, and cut short. The next morning, the boys' truck was still parked outside the station, doors open, engine running. Inside, the seats were empty, except for the tape recorder still playing static. Abner Crane was nowhere to be found. The town didn't search long. They said he'd finally run off, that maybe the shame was too much. But the laughter stopped after that. The jokes died in their throats. In the weeks that followed, the teenagers' families filed missing person reports, one after another, until Dry Mesa learned what silence really sounded like. Some say the wind changed that summer. It carried a different kind of sound, soft, breathless, almost like a man chuckling under his breath. But no one dared to listen long enough to know for sure. The summer heat in Dry Mesa had turned cruel by July, the kind that made metal shimmer and air feel heavy with warning. That night, the sky hung low and red, and the desert wind carried the scent of something burning long before anyone saw the flames. Abner Crane's trailer stood at the edge of town, a lonely shape against the sand. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was already gone, nothing left but melted aluminum and ash. The sheriff said it was faulty wiring, an accident, but the people who watched from their porches told another story. They swore they saw figures moving through the smoke, 5 or 6 shapes circling the trailer, their hands holding something that glowed like torches. Some claimed to hear laughter, low, cruel, familiar. Others said it wasn't laughter at all, but a strange kind of chanting, as if the desert itself were joining in. No one stepped forward. No one dared to help. By morning, there was nothing left of Abner, but blackened earth and twisted scraps of metal. Sheriff Denton wrote the report in a single page. Accidental electrical fire. No body recovered. He told the press it was over, told the town to move on. But behind closed doors, the deputies whispered about the smell, how it wasn't just smoke or rubber, but iron, thick and metallic, clinging to their clothes for days. They buried the report deeper than most, and the ashes cooled under a pale July sun. Then, 3 nights later, something new appeared. At dawn, a delivery driver passing by the ruins stopped his truck and stared. Rising from the ashes was a cross, 7 feet tall, welded from pieces of old machinery and rusted pipe. It hadn't been there before. Its base was dark, soaked through with something that had dried to a deep, rusty brown. The driver called the sheriff, hands shaking. When they arrived, the air smelled heavy again, that same sweet, iron scent. There were handprints on the cross, small ones, smudged and perfect, as if someone had pressed them there with care. The town tried to make sense of it. Some said teenagers were pulling a sick prank. Others claimed Abner had returned, that he was marking the spot where they had tried to erase him. A woman who lived nearby swore she saw movement near the ruins that night, a shadow crawling, not walking, across the sand. When she turned on her porch light, it froze, then melted back into the darkness. By morning, no one spoke of it again. The sheriff ordered the cross removed, but the men who tried refused to touch it. The tools rusted in their hands, and by the next sunrise, the cross was gone. All that remained were the prints in the dirt, and a faint trail of blood leading toward the desert, fading where the sand began to whisper. The desert around Dry Mesa had always been still, silent in that heavy, ancient way, like it had seen too much and learned not to speak. But a month after the fire, something in it began to stir. Coyotes stopped howling. Birds stopped crossing the sky. Even the wind moved differently, as if careful not to wake whatever was now listening. It was a hunter who found the first sign. A mule deer torn apart near the old highway. The limbs were arranged neatly, almost lovingly, into a perfect circle. No tracks, no drag marks, no blood trail, just that eerie precision, and the smell of copper in the air. The sheriff called it a coyote kill, though he couldn't explain the pattern. Locals didn't believe him. The whispers started small, that the land was changing, that Abner Crane's suffering had soaked too deep into the soil. Some said the desert had taken pity on him. Others said it had taken him whole. 2 weeks later, the first human body appeared. Brandon Keats, the boy who'd held the camera the night they humiliated Abner. His truck was found on the same stretch of road, engine still running, radio hissing static. Across the hood, carved deep and rough, were 3 words: "Say my name." The letters weren't cut by a knife. They were gouged, as if by something with no patience for steel. Inside, Brandon's body sat slumped against the driver's seat, eyes open, mouth twisted as if he'd died mid-laugh. The medical examiner couldn't make sense of the wounds. They weren't burns or cuts, more like something had pulled at him, stretched the skin until it tore. But what unnerved them most was the blood. Samples revealed 2 separate DNA types. One was Brandon's, the other was unknown, not animal, not fully human either. The town fell into quiet dread. Doors were locked before sunset. The bar closed early. At night, dogs barked at empty lots, and people claimed to see flickers of light darting through the sand, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Old-timers remembered the stories about spirits born of pain, about the earth reclaiming what men had destroyed. They said Abner had joined the land, that his broken body had become something else, something that watched from beneath the soil. Out past the gas station ruins, travelers swore they heard whispering carried on the wind, soft, rhythmic, almost pleading. Some said it was just the desert shifting. Others thought it was a name, repeated over and over in a voice, small and trembling. Abner, Abner, Abner. By autumn, Dry Mesa was no longer just a quiet town with a tragedy. It had become a story the rest of the world wanted to touch. Paranormal crews rolled in with their cameras and sensors, their voices full of thrill and disbelief. They set up along the ruins of the gas station, across the dunes where the wind never stopped moving, chasing a whisper they thought they could capture. Locals watched from behind curtains, their faces pale with something deeper than fear, because the whispers were real. Everyone had heard them by then. The first recording came from a small team based out of Phoenix. They left their microphones buried in the sand overnight. When they played the tapes the next morning, the sound was faint, almost fragile, a loop of static and breath. But beneath it, a voice emerged, low, broken, and human. They laughed. They laughed. The pattern repeated every 17 seconds. When compared to old answering machine archives, the voice matched Abner Crane's voicemail greeting perfectly. Same tone, same inflection, same trembling patience. After that, more crews arrived. Reporters, skeptics, those chasing fame or proof. But the deeper they dug, the stranger things became. One journalist from Albuquerque collapsed during filming, claiming she heard the whisper inside her head. She kept mumbling that the voice knew her name. Others reported their equipment dying at the same exact moment each night, 2:14 a.m., the same time those missing had last been seen. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to change. They spoke of waking up in the desert with sand under their fingernails, unsure how they got there. Some found strange footprints outside their homes, small, uneven, like those of a man with a limp. Others heard a low hum beneath their floors, deep and steady, as though the ground itself was breathing. Then came the drifter. He'd been sleeping behind the diner, trading stories for cigarettes. One night, he ran into the sheriff's office, trembling, swearing he'd seen Abner or something that looked like him, dragging a body toward the dry riverbed. He said it moved wrong, like a shadow pretending to be alive. The sheriff dismissed it, told him to sleep it off. 2 days later, the drifter was gone. His campfire still warm, his belongings untouched. The only thing left was his tape recorder, half buried in the dirt. When they pressed play, it was all there. The wind, the sand shifting, and then that same broken voice. They laughed. They laughed. But as the tape continued, a new sound joined in, a soft chuckle, deep and slow, as if someone else had finally learned to laugh back. Carl Denton had worn the badge of Dry Mesa for 30 years, long enough to see every sin in that town get buried under dust. But age does strange things to a man's conscience. When the voices began, those whispers the wind carried through the streets, he couldn't sleep anymore. He knew what they were about. He had been part of the silence that kept Abner Crane's pain hidden. He remembered the reports, the paperwork, the laughter in the station when those complaints came across his desk. Harassment, assault, property damage, all filed under Abner's name. All stamped resolved without a single investigation. He drove to the old precinct one last time, the building now half empty, the walls still lined with yellowing case files. The air smelled like mildew and regret. In the archives, he found the drawer he'd been avoiding for years, the one labeled 1991 Civil Disturbance. Inside were stacks of papers burned around the edges, water damaged from some long-forgotten flood. And tucked behind them, wrapped in a cracked leather folder, was a smaller book. It was a journal, half burned, the handwriting uneven, pressed hard into the paper like each word had been carved instead of written. Every page carried a name, a date, an address. Next to each was a single red mark, sometimes smeared, sometimes shaped like a fingerprint. The list stretched longer than Denton remembered there being people involved. Some of those names he recognized, others he didn't. At the very end, scrawled across a page torn in half, were the words, "They will return to the earth that mocked me." He took the book to the sheriff's office, shaking as he handed it over. They sent it for analysis, thinking it was a hoax. But the handwriting matched Abner's old employment records. The stains weren't ink, they were blood, human. Within days, a search team found the first site. Near the old mining shafts that cut deep into the desert rock, they unearthed bones, dozens of them, arranged in a circle like the deer carcass from months before. each set carefully positioned, facing inward. Forensics reported something even stranger. The remains weren't decomposing. Flesh fragments on some bones had been chemically treated. Embalming fluid, rust residue, as if someone or something had been preserving them, not burying them. Carl Denton stopped talking after that. He moved out of town, leaving his badge on the station steps. But before he left, he told one reporter a single line that made its way into the archives. Abner didn't want revenge. He wanted remembrance. And the desert, well, it remembers better than any man ever could. By 1993, Dry Mesa had emptied out like a well gone dry. Windows were boarded, mailboxes leaned, and the only sound after sunset was the wind dragging its feet across the road. People said the town had been taken by a clock. Every night at 2:14 a.m., a child's laugh fell through the canyon, thin and silver, like a coin dropped into water. It was never loud, only exact. It marked the hour the way a church bell would, except no one prayed anymore. They packed their lives into trucks and left without looking back, as if the act of looking might invite the sound inside their bones. Truckers still used the old highway, and they told the same story without knowing each other. A small figure standing out in the basin, lantern held low, as if guiding traffic off the edge of the world. You could not film it. Cameras froze. Batteries died. Red lights blinked and then went blind. Radios cracked with static, and then, through the noise, a voice rose up, calm and almost polite. "Do you see me now?" Each time it asked, the signal weakened, like the voice was pushing through sand to reach a mouth. Some drivers answered without meaning to. Some cried. Some shut off their rigs and prayed to a God they had not spoken to in years. I drove that road once, long after the town closed its eyes, and I listened to the frequencies where no station lives. I told myself the sound was weather, a shift in air, a trick of the desert, but the desert does not trick. It remembers. Pain is a seed in this soil, and memory is the water. What we bury does not sleep here. It roots, it spreads, it learns our names. The last families said the laughter followed them as they packed, that it hopped roofs like a sparrow and nested in empty rooms. A woman swore the hallway lengthened as she walked it, that her front door kept skating away from her like a mirage. A boy woke with sand in his mouth and the taste of iron on his tongue. People prayed again then, but their prayers felt small, as if the sky had already chosen a side. This was not a haunting. It felt older, closer, like inheritance. The desert had taken Abner's hurt and made it into a language. It spoke in light and in outages, in static and in polite questions, in the careful steps of a small figure carrying a lamp across the sand. Some nights I think the road still asks me the same soft thing. Do you see me now? I do not answer. I slow the car and let the engine idle. And in the rearview mirror the lantern grows brighter, then small again, as if breathing. Maybe the land only wants witness. Maybe it is waiting for someone to finally speak his name. Today, Dry Mesa is a place the maps no longer mention. A blacked-out square on satellite images, fenced off by rusted wire and warning signs that flap weakly in the wind. Contaminated zone, they read. Do not enter. But still, people go. Urban explorers, filmmakers, wanderers, who crave the silence only forbidden places hold. They step past the gates, through the bones of a town swallowed by sand, and the desert greets them with stillness so complete, it feels alive. They say the first thing you notice is the color. Everything is sun-bleached, drained, except for the stains. Patches of red that no rain or wind can erase, streaked across cracked walls and half-buried floor tiles. Some think it's paint. Others know better. In one of the old houses, they find children's shoes turned to stone, their laces hardened mid-knot. Every windstorm should have buried them years ago, yet after each one they sit right where they were, untouched. Around them, small handprints press into the sand, fresh, perfect, new each time. as if someone small is still playing there, unseen, waiting for laughter that never comes. Forensic teams have gone back, trying to make sense of it. Soil tests, radiation scans, air sampling, nothing explains what the land holds. Then came the DNA results. The samples gathered from those handprints, from the edges of those stains, all point to one name: Abner Crane. 30 years after the fire, his genetic signature still lingers, impossible, unaged, repeating. Scientists call it contamination. Locals call it proof. Some nights, motion sensors on the fences pick up movement, small, slow steps that appear, stop, then vanish. Security cameras flicker, catching shapes in the dust. A short figure walking the road between the ruins, carrying a faint light. No footprints left behind, only that familiar whisper, soft and distant. They laughed. The wind carries it across the plains, through the dead trees and empty houses. It slips into the ears of those who listen too long, a voice too steady to be memory. People who visit say the desert feels different here, that it watches, that if you stand still long enough, the ground begins to hum beneath your feet. They say the desert doesn't forget its outcasts. It adopts them. It makes them part of itself, wind, dust, bone, and whisper. And when the storm rises at dusk, sweeping over Dry Mesa, you can hear the land breathe. The sand shifts like muscle, the dunes quiver, and through it all comes that faint voice, fragile and endless, calling from beneath the earth. Abner. Abner.